I'd like to back up now to the beginning so we can get the full context of this. Do you all know that Bruce was the recording engineer for The Doors? Still to this day remasters all the original albums, and they're
Be careful what you wish for.
and they're magnificent. The work is absolutely magnificent. You went from doing that to taking a job at CBS, is that correct?
Yeah.
And then that in turn led to meeting Jerry.
Yeah,
So-
I was always into the newest technology coming down the pike and thought that digital was great. It is, but it isn't. Anyway, the head of A&R, Don Ellis, who has passed, he came to me and he said, I'd like you to represent Columbia Records as our producer, because we have financed the entire recording of the score, Star Trek.
Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
The motion picture. So that's how I met Jerry, and then that became this, became E.T., became Temple of Doom, became Color Purple, and
In 25 years of working with Jerry.
yeah.
Do you remember the very first meeting with Jerry ever?
Oh, yeah. I went to his house, and I had just come back from Hawaii. I was all in white. I had a very long ponytail, which Jerry,
Did not yet.
not yet, but he moved there. I think I'd been off the plane no more than a day. And I went over and sat with him, and we talked about Star Trek and what I was going to be bringing to it. And I mentioned digital, and he was always a huge fan of anything new. So we had a good relationship from that standpoint. And he was like my brother in some respects. We could yell at one another, and nothing was personal, because it was all art.
So this would have been 1979.
Yeah.
So digital at that time, you still were not actually looking at, when we think of
No,
now,
we
looking
didn't.
at computer screens with waveforms on it.
No.
It's just the tape itself was a digital format.
Yeah.
And there were challenges in actually trying to get everybody's mind wrapped around that.
Mhm.
Were there in recording that?
Well,
song?
there was a little bit of a problem that happened in the middle of recording Star Trek. Let's say middle, about 2/3 of the way through, where the first chair of the French horn section decided that because we were recording digitally, we were going to put the musicians out of work. That it was an instrument. It wasn't an instrument, it was a recorder. So he got the Musicians Union to come down. I met with the head of the music department at 20th Century Fox, Lionel Newman, who was actually conducted most of Star Trek, motion picture. And the union said, we're going to shut the picture down unless you take this equipment out of here, which was completely crazy. And I mean, I had the power because I had the purse strings to do it, but I just acquiesced. I called New York and said, we got a problem, and the only solution is to just continue recording it in analog, and I'll get it onto digital, and we'll finish it, which is what happened. But there was I've told this story in print a few times, but basically, the record company wanted to do a big deal about the fact that it was Star Trek and we were recording digitally. And I, at the Audio Engineering Society convention in January of 1980, I went there and they had, no, it wasn't, it was, it was October of '79. They had a digital editor that they had built. It was the first one in the world. It was hand built. And somehow or another I convinced them to let me have it so we could edit Star Trek. And it worked great. Jerry and I, at my office at Columbia Records, put the album together, and we were having a great time. And then he decided he wanted to change the sequence of what cue was where, and wanted to take out a little repetition, that Jerry didn't feel that on the record there should be more than needed to be. Because a lot of times there were repeats built in to cover a sequence, to stretch it. So we set about doing it, and the damn editor stopped working. And the next morning I had to cut lacquer masters before CD. And we had to have 500,000 pressings 8 days later.
In the stores?
Yeah, huh?
In the stores, 8 days later, or shipping?
Getting ready to go, and as party favors at the premiere at the Space and Science Museum
Washington, right?
in Washington, D.C. And they were kind of counting on it, being mastered off of digital and all that. Well, my life was truly over because I couldn't, I saw myself getting fired and everything. So I had taken all the equipment down to Capitol Records, and my mastering engineer, his name is Wally Traugott, which is German Traugott for trust in God. And I got it in there, and I was preparing to transfer it all to analog, do the edits, and then master off that, because I had no choice. I go to dinner with my wife, and I'm trying to eat. It's like the scene from Young Frankenstein. You haven't touched your food, So I hadn't touched my food. I couldn't eat. It was like, hanging by a thread, and somebody's going to cut it, and you're going to die. So I come back into Capitol, I'm walking down the hallway, and this very large gentleman, not much different from Dave, and he comes up to me and he says, "Hi, I'm John." And he says, "You don't know me, but my wife is a psychic." And she says, "You're working with some new equipment that's doing something strange, and I think I can help you." And I looked at him, I said, "You're kidding me." And he said, "No." So I said, "Okay." So I put all the gear back in the car, went over to Columbia Records in Century City, set it all up. He got his wife on the phone, we got her on the speakerphone, and he proceeds touching all the equipment. And he says, "No, everything's good, everything's good." And she's over the phone saying, "Yeah, this is okay, there's nothing wrong, there's nothing." She says, "Make an edit." So I put the tapes back in, recall the edit, aborts. And she said, "What are you recording on?" I said, "Well, it's on tape." She said, so I ejected, because these are on video cassettes, 3/4 inch U-Matics. And eject them. He held the source tape, which is the one that Jerry and I had done the night before. Nothing wrong with that one. Took the one in the recorder. She said, "It's got a defect." And I went and looked at it, and sure enough, there was a time code interruption on the track. And right where I was doing the edit is exactly where the interruption was. So I, put a new roll in, quickly re-edited it, and about 2 hours later, because everything in those days was linear. It's not like how we work today in hard drives, hard disk editing systems.
You have to real time.
Real time, everything is in real time. So if it took an hour program, it could take you a couple hours to do it. And then you had to QC it to make sure there were no dropouts before it went. Anyway, got over to Capitol, got it done, and I'm still alive.
Now, in those days, so your digital was all direct, just 2-channel stereo,
Two
right?
channel.
There was no multi-channel
Nope.
yet. So this would be a live mix?
These were live mixes.
Yet, there's also multi-track, as you and I a few years ago were.
Right.
So the movie would be mixed analog,
Yeah.
but this was a digital live 2-track stereo mix.
Right, and when we went and remixed Star Trek: The Motion Picture, we transferred everything off the original 16 tracks, a 2-inch tape, and discovered that it was running at 30 IPS, which was incredible, and the tapes were in incredibly good condition. But when we got into it, I was really surprised, because all I had ever heard up to, when did we do this, 4 years ago?
2011 and 12, right?
Okay. I had only been listening to the stereo all these years. I never had my hands on the multi-tracks since then. And it was amazing because of Jerry's insistence, and he even did it with all the movies that I did. He wanted to get live mixes. I mean, a lot of the films we did, like Gremlins and a few other things, everything was live to 4 or 6 track magnetic film for the film. Poltergeist was this way, ET. I mean, it was a majority of the films.
Didn't go back and remix later.
We didn't go back and remix. You got it live. And when we got into it, I was really surprised because the tracks were actually kind of minimal. We didn't have as much control as we thought we did. It was basically the 3-track mix and some sweeteners and things like that here and there.
And that would have been basically because it was all John Neal's call about how many mics and how to place them.
Well, yeah, but Jerry made him shut stuff down.
Ah, okay.
See, Jerry decided he wanted to. This is one of the last films that Lionel Newman conducted for Jerry. I mean, there was a history because Jerry was Lionel's fair-haired boy. He loved Jerry. And
back to the 60s, he was conducting.
oh yeah,
stores.
and he used to conduct, and that was one of the things. I mean, politically it was convenient, and Jerry also was not a good conductor then. He used to go when I first started working with him. I remember on Gremlins. I mean, we had a stack of towels because he perspired so much. I mean, because he was like this, you know, you think he was going to take off and fly. but later on, and I'm trying to think what movie it was at Paramount that we were doing, he decided to become a real conductor. And he started taking lessons from a gentleman named Sam Crackmullins, who was the main conductor of the opera in Rome. I'm trying to think which one.
La Scala?
But I think it was the La Scala. Anyway, so, and this man was beautiful. He always dressed in a brown suit, and he was very robust and very bushy red hair. And he had a smile. He looked like the Cheshire Cat. I mean, he was, but good teeth instead of. and he would sit there during the sessions in the middle of the orchestra with the score and make notes and watching Jerry and then correct Jerry as well. And then Jerry realized that in order to get more out of his scores, he needed to conduct. And even John Williams like that. But John always conducted his own music, whether he was a good conductor until he became a good conductor. You know, you have to go to school and learn this stuff from somebody. Even David Newman was taking conducting lessons when I was working with him.
Wow.
I want to see Explorers.
Huh?
Would that be Explorers at Paramount?
The Explorer Paramount.
Oh, it could have been.
I thought maybe, was it
Maybe.
later?
No, they weren't there then.
I want to go back to just button up that story about the psychic, because you missed one point about it. Is that you actually never found out who that was?
Yeah, I can never, again, find him, or his wife. And it's one of those things that happens in life that are kind of cool. And you know, I mean, I've tried since 1979 to find him. I can't find him.
Wow.
No one knows of him at Capitol. I mean, going way back.
So working on as many soundtrack projects that I do and getting to know other engineers, there's this unique relationship between a composer and engineer, and sometimes a composer tends to stick with somebody. You know, you got John now for many, many years with Sean Murphy, Alan Silvestri with Dennis Sands, you know, James Horner liked Simon Rhodes.
Before that,
Sean, yeah. So, you know, Danny Wallin was always with Lalo. So what is it about that relationship? Is it just a matter of trust, or just a matter of there's a shorthand, or, you know, what is it about that?
I can only tell you from my standpoint, and I probably, if Dennis was here or Sean here, they'd probably answer the same way, is that there's a communication between the composer and the mixer, unsaid, where I know that Jerry would write a score, he'd walk in, and somehow or another, I knew what it was to sound like, and I hadn't heard one note of music. It was just one of those things. And then as it developed, you know, then it would start to come clearer in my head as to what my body, as to what it was supposed to be like. But, you know, there was a common thing that Jerry and I heard a lot the same. And there was one time I said to him, foolishly, I said, so you getting to hear this as you imagined it? He said, I already heard it in my head. He said, you know, he says, and you're just, you know, taking it to another level.
What, going from the Doors and working in the pop music, what was it about what drew you to actually go into film scoring and being around an orchestra?
Oh, well, my parents were both musicians. My mother was a music copyist for Frank Sinatra and Nat King Cole and a lot of stuff on Capitol Records. And my father was played viola, but he started out as a violinist, and he was a rock star in the 20s and the 30s. There was a band called George Olson and Ted Fiorito Orchestra, and he used to play all the solos. So, and even then he told me that the guys were always stoned out of their minds, smoking a lot of pot. He didn't do it, but they did.
Were you particularly looking for an opportunity, or did it
No,
just happen?
I just used to go to sessions with my dad or my mom, and I was very intrigued by what happened. I even tried playing an instrument, and I mean, I played it reasonably well, clarinet and saxophone, but I knew that wasn't my calling. My calling, when I was a little kid, I remember my dad took me to a session, and I wound up in the control room. And they let me push the button and say, take one. And the power of pushing the button. But it was something there. It's like being a photographer, a cinematographer in some respects, where I visualize in my head, what I hear in my head, my body, is what comes out. And I think that's one of the things. I mean, I was able to understand what Jerry was trying to say, even with John, and other composers that I've worked with. It's just being able to relate, to know where they're going, and you don't have to say, did you want this? Do you want that? Because they hire you for what it is that you bring to it. It's in anything that we do. Even if you're washing a car for a living, if you do it a certain way that is better than, or different than other people do, people come to you for that. So it's my visualization. It's how I visualize music.
So now you actually were not the scoring engineer of credit on either Poltergeist and ET, but you were with Jerry from Star Trek, and then interim scores like The Final Conflict, The Secretive, Nim, Night Crossing, Under Fire. And then, but you were basically always
basically producing
the digital recordings and the
yeah, there were a
albums.
lot of, in the early days, like in the case of Poltergeist and ET, anything more than that?
I think after that, his Twilight Zone movie, you actually became his engineer.
Right. But at that time, the unions were very, very strong, and especially at the studios. And guest mixers were not allowed, even though I was a member of the union. The IAN is still in. So in the case of Poltergeist and ET, Lyle Burbridge, lovely guy, who was the head of the sound department then. And you gotta understand, it was still MGM. So it was real. I brought some photos, but I think that you got me once to show.
Yeah, we also have some digital. You want to look at them?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
We can talk about it. How ET came about, I imagine you're gonna
Well, yeah, we'll get
this
this.
because I was doing, the second film I did with Jerry was Poltergeist, and I couldn't work the console, but I could bring microphones in and set it up and stand behind Lyle and say, start with this, add a little EQ, a little reverser, bring this up, okay, it's basically great. There's Lyle, and there's Frank Marshall.
And this is the MGM scoring
And this
stage.
meant,
Now the Sony stage.
and now you can see, but this console is right up against the glass. And the loudspeakers were behind you, and it was set up 6-track because that's what they used to do. Movies like Exodus and Spartacus and anything like that. Do you have any other photos or just?
Oh yeah, I can let it go to the, it'll go to the next one in a second.
Oh, you will?
I've just been pausing between them.
Oh, okay. These are ones that I took. This is the machine room. Even though this is a 6-track, we were recording on 4-track. And what you see here are dubbing, are reels of dialogue and a click track. that Ken Hall, I don't know if you guys know who Ken Hall is, but Ken Hall is, in my estimation,
Great music.
the best music editor for film ever.
And he was with Jerry and John at Fox in the 60s.
Yeah.
And basically part of this group of people.
Right.
So, in fact, let me just interject, I've always imagined that it's like you and Kenny Hall and Arthur Morton, the orchestrator, were kind of like 3 points of a triangle holding up Jerry.
Yeah,
I think that's fair.
until Sandy took over.
Until Sandy took over, yeah.
Alexander Courage.
Sure, yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Here's the stage.
It really hasn't changed much. The only thing that I've noticed, and I'm going to try and push if somebody, it depends on many scores I get to do there. If you can see these boxes there all around, those were in the room. And the room, to me, sounded better then. I mean, they're even up high. It had more reverberation for some reason. When you walked in the room, you almost thought you were in a concert hall that had a short reverb time.
And this is, of course, very hallowed halls where all those great MGM musicals are.
All of them were done. Alexander Courage wrote most of the arrangements for all the songs. Can you make that move faster? You can see my M50 microphones up above there on top. These are microphones that were devised by the Germans for German radio broadcast, and they're just superb.
The digital recorder.
This is the 4-track digital recording we were doing for ET and Poltergeist. They would lock them up
so that you could get 3 channels.
so I could get 3 channels. And here are the loudspeakers. And there's a Elvis Presley film that I actually dubbed, and they rehearsed in this room. This is part of the control. This still exists. It's a gigantic space, and these were the same loudspeakers that they have in the dubbing theaters. So it was really cool. You recorded through these things, and when you went on the dubbing stage, you didn't have any surprises.
Right.
It was the same, and it was really cool.
I think that's all.
If you have questions as we're wrapping, go ahead.
That's all I was doing.
That's the only photos you've got. Is there more?
No, I think there are a couple more. Or is that it?
He doesn't have them digitally. So you want to see?
Well, I got it.
But the thing about Poltergeist is that there was an interesting thing that happened with regard to actually booking the orchestra,
Yeah.
because
Oh,
the session musicians were booked. So what happened with that?
well, there were too many sessions going in town. Those days, the orchestras worked a lot. I mean, they were busy at Fox, they were busy at Paramount, they were busy at Warner's, and there were a few small independent places, and we could get into MGM, and we didn't have an orchestra. So Jerry said, well, let's hire the Los Angeles Philharmonic, which we did. And that was spectacular because that was a unit that played with one another daily. They paid attention to dynamics that were written on the page. It was, Jerry, I remember he came in after the first cue and he says, this is phenomenal. It's like being in London, because that's the way they're in London. In London, they have 6 full-time practicing symphony orchestras. And you can hire an entire orchestra.
So when you saw the Los Angeles Philharmonic trucks and all
Yeah,
that,
they came in and they loaded it up, they set it up. You didn't touch anything. This is, we set up our cables afterwards, yes.
How much time would be spent on a particular score, whether it be a particular cue or the whole score? How much time?
Normally it was 3.5 days. It's not a lot. 2 sessions a day sometimes. The third day usually was 1 session. Star Trek: The Motion Picture, on the other hand, was 22 sessions. That's because we had lots of time on that film.
Well, plus the 20 minutes of scores, first bunch of cues.
They got thrown out,
yeah.
right. Robert Weiss and Jerry were very close, yes.
I remember you guys said that was this Christmas that you had also at the Black Hole from Disney. Do you know if that was recorded here with the musicians? Because that was also a digital.
I think it was a different
No,
process.
they did that on 3M 32 tracks, and they did that at Disney, which is, the scoring stage is now W Theater.
Hmm.
It's the only one they've got left.
How is that not a threat to the union, whereas what you were doing was a threat?
Well, Sean Murphy was the mixer on staff at Disney, so that was no threat.
Okay, I got it.
We gotta understand that movie studios generally insisted that the scores had to be recorded there.
Right.
And posted there. And later, I mean, Steven had enough cred that he could go elsewhere. When we did Poltergeist and ET, his offices were on the lot at MGM.
That's where the first Amblin office was.
That's
and
where-
Irvin
well-
Goldberg's office.
Yeah, and yes.
When you mentioned this before, the thing that always really surprised me is what was the threat that what were they afraid of?
Well, you don't want to usurp somebody else's job.
But I remember you also saying that for digital recording.
I think they were interpreting digitally recording as somehow replacing the
Yeah, they
instruments
thought it was an
and
instrument.
Right.
That
They felt
that
it
they
was gonna
could
take
suck
their
it
jobs
in,
away.
Yeah.
and we could take the individual notes out of there and make an orchestra.
We can now.
Tonight,
Which we can,
it used to be done, but then it was impossible. Truly impossible.
And so that's why only partly done digitally at that point.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, yes.
Did you guys continue to hire the LA Phil?
No, that was the one and only time. But Jerry and I talked about it a lot, but he, through working with the contractor, he was able to actually put together an orchestra that he really thought was gonna be great, and it was. I mean, they really got, and he was on it, and the better he got as a conductor, the more he started saying, well, I put those dynamics there for a reason. And John, I've seen John do that too. He just said, hey,
Play
what do you see at bar 32? You see a diminuendo? Play it. Nicely, but basically. I mean, we got down to, even doing it with the orchestras in London, we'd have 32 violins. And orchestras sometimes can get lazy if they don't like you. But the orchestra loved Jerry and John. And we'd always say, I say, Jerry, let me hear the violins. Let's hear the back section. And so they had to play and to let them know that we're listening, things like that.
Anytime that Poltergeist is discussed in any way, the one subject that has never gone away for 35 years is the subject of the director.
Yes,
And,
by the way, the blood is from Mike.
yeah.
So if anybody,
Yeah, sorry about that, so it's an imprint. But God rest the soul of Toby Hooper, very, very talented man who we just lost this year. But was he around at the sessions? at all?
no, Toby Hooper was not there. It was totally Steven. And I mean, the scene where the father looks in the mirror and starts pulling his face.
Oh, the assistant.
The assistant, yeah. And that's Steven's hands
Hands, yeah.
doing that.
So where do you come down on that whole issue? Or do you have a...
What do you mean?
About the directing?
If you go back in the history of Hollywood, not sexually, but historically, directors used to make 6 features a year, directed, and they didn't post them. They went and shot them, the producer took and edited them, took them into the dubbing stage and finished them. That was the role of
The
the
director's
producer.
way on to...
And then he went on to the next film, or she did. So, in this case, I didn't think anything strange about it.
Right.
Either Toby went on to another movie, or there were disagreements about stylistically, or how the film was to come out.
But also
It was
Steven was
Steven's
kind
film.
of launching his production company with this
Right.
thing as a model for what Amblin was going to do,
Right.
so he had a lot riding on it.
Yeah, so Steven took it over.
Are you all up for a kind of a longish clip from Poltergeist with no music?
Yeah,
Followed by
that'd be
singing
cool.
with it, and maybe we'll go step in the back. So, again, this is a cue called Let's Get Her. And the interesting thing about it is that it's basically a speech followed by a 3-minute unbroken tape in an upstairs hallway with people just standing talking.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a 7.5-minute clip we're going to show. The amazing thing is that that's all there is. It's just a speech and an unbroken take of people talking. And so you've never seen this before, and it's an opportunity to really see, it's like what you've really got before the composer comes in. So let's take the lights. Pretty amazing. But the thing is that the filmmaking is so strong, the acting is so strong, all the components are so strong in it.
Mhm.
So how do you feel like when you see this without music?
Well, I think it's real powerful. I more than once have seen films with Jerry or alone before we went in to record them, before Jerry had written the music. And if you can watch a film without the music, it takes on a whole different thing. I remember when Rambo, El Rambo Dos. I went into Andy Vanya, who was the producer and owner of Caracal Pictures, asked me to come by and see it before we scored it. Went to London to do it. And I sat through the film. You know, it's a fair amount of comic book in the film, but it was at a time coming out of the wars and whatnot that it really rang true without the music. And I came out with a screening, and he said, "So what did you think?" I said, "I got angry," and he said, "Good." And then, you know, Jerry fed on that, not what I said, but that was his reaction as well. But it's really interesting for a composer, especially. Jerry never liked to see a film that was temp, or did he? And he did with yours? Yeah, that's. Because
Trust my show, I guess.
Yeah. Well, there's a story about Joe Dante sticking Bernard Herrmann into everything, right?
Well, he do that, yes. And
It's like, oh Christ, Joe, no.
And what was the Italian composer that we did in
In the Burbs.
in Burbs?
Marconi?
Yeah. Marconi, there's a sequence in there that Joe just wanted Marconi. So bad.
So we're going to look at this again with just Jerry. No dialogue sound effects now, but you have a choice. We can either do it with subtitles to help, or just clean since you just heard it. Anybody feel like you need for subtitles?
I think so.
No subtitles?
Okay. I think subs help, but I would.
Who wants subtitles?
I do.
You want subtitles?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was without it. I was having trouble figuring it out.
All right.
I mean, but is this a stem that was a dub stem?
It's actually, I had 3-track effects and mono dialogue.
Okay, so it was mixed.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but I mean, it's all mostly nothing going on there.
Yeah, I mean, they're all whispering, so it's real hard.
Right. So, should we do it with subtitles?
Yeah.
Okay. So, same scene then with subtitles. This is and you'll hear the voice of Kenny Hall calling the sleep,
Yep.
and some.
That was, Kenny always did the slates for all of our takes. It was
and
great.
some
I didn't have
stage-
to push the button.
and some stage chit chat.
Yeah.
And I believe this was grabbed in one take. This performance.
Just so you know,
There's one insert. There's one insert that-
Jerry, 10 times out of 10, if he had a long piece, he would rehearse the orchestra, maybe for 3 hours. Go to lunch, come back, do a take.
Nail it.
And nail it. And then there might be a pickup for a couple of bars where somebody did a flub and they'd get it. And just
And he did not like to do what John did, which is 6 measures of this take, 4 measures of that take, then back to this take.
Well,
Jerry was mostly a master take and a few little fixes.
On ET and Temple of Doom, John did complete takes. And
Yeah.
did inserts. Later on.
Later on, he's into that now.
Yeah, I don't know, is that what he's doing?
Yeah, it's a lot of intercutting, lots of it.
Yeah, we used to get complete takes, and the reason for that was Jerry liked the performance.
Right. Not so manufactured, but just kind
Well,
of
it isn't,
natural.
perfect isn't necessarily the best.
Right.
Mistakes are good, right, Marshall?
Okay, let's hear the great Jerry Goldsmith. Boy, do I miss Jerry when we look at a scene like that and hear that kind of music. So, but that collaboration continued till we lost him in 2004.
Mm.
Right, how many scores? Maybe 50?
No, I did over 100.
Oh, running. Oh,
Scores. But, some of them I didn't record, some of them I just mixed. Some of the, it depended on whether the company could afford to fly me over, or whether there was, like in the case of English films, where they had something called the ET plan, if it was financed partially by the British government, if you worked with British people.
If you spent so much money over there,
Yeah.
right, so. You mentioned electronics, and of course, it's interesting that this score has no electronics.
Right,
The sequel has a lot of them.
a lot of it.
So there was in the early 80s, there was this transition
Well, when I
where
first,
Jerry became more enamored of them.
well, he loved electronics. I mean, he started on Logan's Run with an ARP 2500. And we utilized that on Star Trek The Motion Picture along with the beam. And that was the beginning of real electronics for him.
Right.
Uh,
But even like the very next year, when you get to Psycho 2 and Twilight Zone, suddenly there's electronics, where
Yes.
on this
Well,
one, he decided none.
But on Twilight Zone, did we do Twilight Zone first and then Gremlins?
Yes.
Yes, okay. At that time, see, today, you can program electronics to what the composer can do it in his writing, and it'll play. It'll kick off the synthesizers and play everything, you know, so they doesn't need musicians anymore. For that goes back to what the musicians union was frightened of. But he would, on Twilight Zone, we had 4 keyboardists. One of them was James Newton Howard, who I brought into that circle. And they played synthesizers, parts that Jerry had written. He had found the sounds that he wanted, played them through guitar amps, you know, Fender amplifiers on the stage, and they had volume pedals, so they had to play and do their dynamics according to the score. So Jerry was conducting in the room, full orchestra and the electronics in the room, so it was.
So not right into a board, but actually re-recorded acoustically.
Well, both ways.
Both ways.
I did both. You know, what he would do out into the room, I would then enhance it with the direct signals off the synthesizers, just to get a little presence, and then I could treat it and add more reverb or whatever, you know, depending on what the cue demanded. But that was the first time for him to really go for it, and it was really cool.
Which one was that, sorry?
Twilight Zone, the motion picture. You should listen to it. The cool thing about it is that electronics, for the most part, when you have them running with an orchestra, they're really two-dimensional. They're just there. They're either loud or soft. Whereas with an orchestra, you've got depth. I've got from here to the back row. So there's a lot of depth in imagery where you can literally walk around in the orchestra. So by having the electronics play live in the room, it could be balanced with the orchestra, and we had more three-dimensionality. We did it, the same thing on Gremlins. And then he went off to England to do Supergirl. And tried it there, and I wasn't part of that, with
Eric Tomlinson,
who did
the Star Wars trilogy,
Star Wars.
Raiders,
He
yeah.
did Jerry's only score, that won an Academy Award.
The Omen.
The Omen, brilliant mixer. But somehow or another, when they hooked it up, something went wrong, and they were playing, and the 2 of the loudspeakers in the studio, they were doing this at Abbey Road. Instead of having lots of different amps and, you know, the guys playing it, they had a guy there mixing on a board in the room. Jerry go, more S, you know, S1, you know, G, you know, whatever. And loudspeakers caught on fire. He was producing some wave in there that was just perfect to generate electricity. And it caught on fire, and that was the end of that.
Wow. And then did you go, you had ended up?
Then I wound up going to England, we re-recorded the score, and Eric was there, but he was basically side. I had to do like I did with Lyle
Just
Burbridge,
stand there and do the
Stand there
same with his face.
tell him what to do.
Wow.
The fire extinguisher.
No, there we just took the electronics
No,
direct, and then I wound up mixing it all.
So Poltergeist being an MGM film
Yeah.
for the Nascent Amblin Productions located at MGM, with a score done at MGM made sense. Now, John Williams had his period with John Neal on the Star Wars albums, and then the recording of,
Well, he did Jaws. No, he didn't.
he did the album of
He
Jaws.
did
So,
Jaws.
but
was
1941, for example, was
1941
John
at
Neal.
Fox.
No, at Warner's. It was at Warner's.
41?
Yeah, it was.
Oh, I
The
thought-
trailer was at Fox, the score was at
Oh,
Warner's.
okay, well, I went to
So, it's the
scoring
trailer.
date at Fox
The trailer score, yeah.
for the trailer score.
Right.
So
So,
I got chased out.
but John was doing it in his London period of the original Star Wars trilogy and Raiders.
Mhm.
Then came back for his next picture with Steven was going to be E.T.
Right,
So, but Poltergeist played a direct role in how that was
Yeah.
going to be handled, correct?
yeah.
He came to
Stephen
the-
told him, well, I guess Stephen had felt that he had gotten everything out of Fox that he wanted to get out of it. And he wanted to go to a fresh place where there was no history, negative or whatever. And he was really enjoying Poltergeist at MGM with what we were doing with the group. And he said, John, I really would like to do it here at MGM. My offices are here, just makes sense. So John came down, and he and Jerry, they're within 2 days of one another, birth-wise, I believe, their birthdays.
The dates, yeah.
Yeah, and they were very close. They used to play four-hand piano together on New Year's Eve, and all that kind of stuff.
They had the same, I think, composition teacher.
Yeah, everybody, and they were competitors, but they were good friends, like tennis players. So one day John showed up, and I had never met John. I knew him in his jazz days when he was Johnny Williams. Knew of him, and all the stuff they did for Capitol Records. And he showed up, and he sat there, and he listened, and he watched, and then he huddled with Stephen, and the next thing I knew, I got a call. We want to do this movie, and John's going to do it. Didn't tell me what it was. I found out when I got there and got a badge. And even then, didn't even know what the film was about.
Wow.
Stephen was super secretive, as he is, generally.
Yeah, to this day.
On films. On this one, I guess that he did the first reading with the cast. They couldn't take scripts out.
Right.
They had to be right then, and they walked out there. They couldn't talk about it. Nothing. And it held true even to going to MGM to record this thing. And I was told it was very secret. He had guards.
No guests coming on.
No guests. Nobody. No nothing. The only guest that showed up was George Lucas.
Mhm. Wow. So Poltergeist started recording in January,
Hmm.
and then we're now into March for E.T.
E.T.
So, but this, now you have regular sessions.
Got the regular studio
Right,
guys.
right. So apart from the LA Phil, basically everything was the same,
Yeah.
including Kenny Hall.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
That
Kenny
was
did this?
curious.
Even
I
though he
think-
did Heartbeats the year before with John
Yeah, I think Kenny
Wannberg.
Wannberg, who was he and Ken Hall were the editors at Fox, music editors. They were really a team. And Kenny Wannberg had been John's editor. Well, he was also a composer, and he was doing a movie. He had written a score, so he could not do E.T. So I guess Jerry and Kenny, and then
Right.
Kenny Wannberg talked to John, and said he should work with Ken Hall.
Right. Well, I mean, and he had done his last film, as I said, Heartbeats
Yeah,
the year
but
before.
even so,
he knew them.
John,
They were all part of that Fox group with Lionel put together in the 60s.
they're all very loyal to one
Yeah,
another.
including Arthur Morton was there,
Mhm.
Herbie Spencer, who was John's
Right.
orchestrator. What do you remember about him? I always heard wonderful things about him.
Not too much, except on E.T.
Mm.
That was the only time that wait a minute. No, I worked with him on Temple
Temple
of
of
Doom,
Doom,
too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, okay, so March of '82 come the E.T. scoring
Mhm.
sessions, highly secretive.
Highly secretive.
And is this your first look at the picture at all?
Absolutely. I mean, he didn't even want to do playbacks against picture. he didn't want the orchestra turning around and looking at the screen.
Wow. Wow. Well, we, 35 years later.
Unlike the Star Trek The Motion Picture, where most of the time it said scene missing. The orchestra would turn around and go, that again? You know.
Well, we just got past Halloween, so why don't we run the Halloween sequence from ET with no music?
Oh, goodness.
And see what that looks like, just laid bare before John Williams comes in. Yeah, so just this year is when we did,
Yeah.
we pulled back, we had an uncut set of the MAG, right, 35 million MAG of the live 4-track mixes, right? And,
We used to record double machine, and surprisingly enough, the B-reels were never cut. Then when we went to Universal together, and they brought them out, and I looked in the, I nearly passed out, I couldn't believe it. We had all the sheets and everything was there, except for one reel,
right,
which we had to get off the 4-track after.
right, because there was some issues with, I guess, last minute changes to the picture and the creation of the album.
Yeah.
And some things maybe got moved around, and this is the thing that happens when we go back so many years later, even with something as high profile as that, sometimes things don't stay together. In the case of the album for this, you co-produced it with John, right? And it was interesting because on something say like Jaws, that album was completely re-recorded.
Yeah.
Raiders used the actual film mixes for the album. The ET was kind of half and half.
Half and half.
And how did that come about?
Well,
And,
both John and Jerry, in those days it was easier to do because we had record sales, physical medium. They would schedule either one or possibly a double session and go in and they would rearrange some of the cues that they felt was better as a listening piece than to have extended areas and doing a lot of editing. So in this case, we went in and recorded one evening a few cues for the album.
it was 2 evenings.
Two evenings, I don't remember exactly.
Right, and we could not find those.
And we couldn't find the masters.
Right. But do
Zero life.
you recall that it might have really been done just digitally?
No. I think it might have been done just digitally.
The
There was no
interesting-
reason to put it
Here's
in
the
the film.
interesting thing, this is from
Except
my-
the one thing,
What?
go ahead, you bring it up, that we did from this session that wound up in another movie. Or is it Poltergeist?
Oh no, that's right. Oh yeah, there were these 2 harp notes at the end of Poltergeist that when we did Poltergeist
Right.
in 2010, I think,
Yeah.
could not find. Didn't really need them. It was just done something for the movie. But I'm like, I wonder where they got those from. Found them on the ET session. So.
Yeah, sometimes we do little pickups, but.
But no, I was going to say there was one cue in the film of ET that had to be done at the album sessions because
Right.
it was replaced, so it probably was dubbed over from the digital to the.
No, we probably recorded MAG for that.
Okay, really? But just that?
Yeah,
Huh.
yeah, they wouldn't have run MAG on the rest.
But I think what happened was, what made my heart sank, is that when I got the session reports from the union, the film sessions said Universal Studios on it.
Yeah.
The album sessions said MCA Records.
Yes.
And MCA Records, now part of Universal Music Group. Universal Music Group is not at all in any way, shape, or form connected with Universal.
Two different publishing companies.
Right, and 2 different companies. I mean, they divested their music group in 2004. A lot of times when somebody can't find something, they point to the fire on the lot, which was 2008, right? And it's possible that they ended up there, but we looked high and low, but ended up finding an album
I
master.
mean, the fact that they
in the
found
UK.
what they found
Yeah.
was extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, I found an album master in the UK to get those things for this Grammy-winning album.
Yeah.
And it went, and it also went gold, right?
It did go gold.
Yeah. So,
My gold album was stolen, I had to get another one.
wow,
Somebody broke into my studio in Hollywood.
wow. One of the stories that comes up about ET ends up being something that happened on the first day. On the first day of recording was the bike chase
Yeah.
and the goodbye scene.
Mhm.
And we always hear both John and Stephen tell the story about how the picture was turned off and it was recorded wild.
Yeah.
What's your recollection of that?
Well,
Why
I
not?
remember that because it wasn't, and this is not uncommon, at least in the case of John and Jerry, where they get onto the dubbing stage, even though it was very difficult to do mock-ups in those days, like they do today. You do full orchestral mock-ups on the synths today, and sampling, but it would be mainly piano. So when it would hit the stage, sometimes the director would go, "Oh my God, I didn't know that was happening. It's really, the music's great, my picture is sideways, I gotta fix that." So most probably, best of my recollection, is that Stephen took a look and realized that the rhythm, that the way they had cut it wasn't working with the music. And he said to John, "I'm gonna turn off the picture. You just record it. I will recut the picture to fit the music." And I even saw that happen to Jerry a couple of times.
It has an effect on how the movie feels to us, though, right?
Yeah.
When the music kind of leads the picture rather than vice versa.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing I have to say for Stephen in his behalf is he really understands what music is all about when it comes to a movie. It's emotion. You know, it helps put you in a place. It's like the first cue that you saw. It made you feel a different way about the scene. And directors are very, very sensitive. Some are very open. Stephen is a good example. And he plays the music. You listen to the movies, you see his movies, the music is played, it's not hidden. Because some directors do not understand music, and they think it's a necessity the studio told them they have to have. And it becomes wallpaper for them. So they don't allow, and they don't want, a lot of the new directors don't understand music to the point that they don't want a composer to have freedom to emotionally help a scene grow. This is not in the case of Jerry and John.
Right, I mean, and especially looking at the films from this era, it's like I'm pining away for scores that good and that prominent. No, we don't really have them. They're kind of, as you say, wallpaper, and somehow trying to hide it, like they're afraid of it somehow. Yet they feel that they need it.
Well, they don't want
So-
melodies.
Right.
And both John and Jerry are,
Yet
Melody
they'll be okay with wall to wall, with 2 hours of music.
yeah.
But 2 hours of music that you don't remember. Whereas opposed to a score like ET, which is 115 minutes, but there's only maybe 80 minutes of score. Poltergeist is
Or-
maybe 55.
Patton,
Right.
33 minutes of music, and you think there's music through the whole film.
Right.
So that's how important it is.
So what about spotting? Because that's to me maybe part of the issue here is that this music can't work unless it's absent.
Yeah.
Right, so I mean,
Well, you want to. Jerry was always. It's very interesting. Mozart had a saying. Let me see if it's here on my thing. And then Jerry lived it. It was. Well, basically, I don't know what I did with it here, but Mozart said what was most important was the space between the notes. And Jerry felt that way, and I know that John does. They believe in space, allowing things to breathe. Don't fill it up, don't telegraph every moment, negative space in anything is so important. It's not this, it's what's going on around it. It's so important. That's why if you listen to Jerry and John's scores, you really get into it, you hear that you can really get inside the orchestra. There's room to move around in there. And you hear voices, melodic voices here and contrapuntal things happening that are there for a reason. That help tell the story.
what do you think it is about, I think the Stephen and John Williams collaboration is just unique in the history of cinema now. I mean, it's unbelievable.
They're joined at the hip. They always have emotionally. Jerry did Poltergeist and
The two Gremlins.
The Gremlins. Well, but where Stephen was the director.
Oh, right.
Twilight Zone, the motion picture, the one episode.
Right. But it was. Did he always come to the sessions of things that he was
Oh,
executive producer on? Gremlin's,
absolutely.
Inner Space. You know,
Yeah.
and Frank and Kathy too.
A lot of the time, but it was mainly Steven. Steven loves to be on the scoring stage. He really does. And he sat there through Gremlins and just had the best time. Just the best time. He loved it. Twilight Zone. He just sat there as a fan.
Right. It was, I guess, he was happy enough with ET that she went on to Temple of Doom and Color Purple.
Yeah.
Right, Color Purple, very, very massive project with many, many different musical components.
Yeah.
And Quincy Jones involved.
Yeah, there were 22 composers on that film. Really. Or 24, I'm not sure exactly what. The funny thing is that the most prominent out of all those was Alexander Courage, Sandy Courage.
Really?
Yeah, I think he did about almost a quarter of the film.
Wow.
Yeah, because Quincy, and I love Quincy, he was going through a divorce at that time and he was just not there. I mean, he'd come up with his themes, but he didn't really write the scores per se. I mean, he told people what he wanted to do. I mean, to have 22 other composers writing cues, you do this section, you do this, and this is what's happening in here, and this is the theme I want here.
After that, John went into his Armin Steiner, Dan Wallin period, and then in 1991 ended up with Sean Murphy. That's
Yep.
stuck with him since.
Yep.
What do you think was, in John's mind?
There was,
why it
they spoke the same language, there's communication. It's like what I had with Jerry.
Yeah.
Same thing. You just, it's intangible. You don't ask why. But Sean has a very unique way of recording and mixing, and he's able to interpret what John is trying to say and get it up on the screen.
Typically,
Really
if
well.
you're going to record, let's say a Jerry score,
Yeah.
and you get onto the stage and you have to get microphones set up and everything set up, what do you know before that? Have you heard mock-ups? Have you looked at the score? I mean,
Very infrequently do I hear a mock-up. And only if I ever heard a mock-up, it's generally because Jerry would ask me to come to the house and do some rough mixes of what he had recorded using Digital Performer and running his electronics. And he had a console and I had set it up for him with a couple of speakers. It was pretty primitive, but it worked. And I would do that for him so he could present them to the director. Like with Paul Verhoeven on Basic Instinct and Total Recall. I did some cues, or I remember doing The Ghost in the Darkness. That was really cool score.
Yeah.
Taking African chanting and figuring out how to rhythmically include it into his score and make that work.
do you have any favorites? What were your favorite Jerry scores?
They're all my favorite.
All of them. I know that sometimes you hear what you've done and wish you could maybe fix it a little bit. Sometimes you're very happy with it.
Yeah, the thing is, the funny thing is, like I say, even about my Doors stuff, I really don't want to go back and remix it. What for? I mean, I'm not the same person I was then. I'm not eating the same food. I was a lot younger. My desires and what I was looking for in life were different. So it's.
Because I remember
It's hard to go back
when
and-
we did Twilight Zone and you wanted to remix the song
Yeah.
that Jennifer Warren sang.
Yeah,
And you did a mix. You asked me what I thought, and I said, well, it's different.
yeah, it was different.
We ended up getting
The new one, the original.
right, and you
Because-
said, you know what? That's where we were at the time. Let's stick with
Yeah,
it.
let's just stick with it. The one thing that we did remix on that was the
overlay of Scatman.
Scatman,
We,
because
oh no, and also Rod. We moved Rod's voice. a little
right,
bit, yeah.
we moved it. Then I couldn't do it because of time and whatnot. We didn't have the tools then. But Scatman Crothers, we overdubbed the orchestra as Scatman, and it was never dead on, and it really never felt comfortable to me. So Mike acquiesced, and
Well, I think we moved Rod also.
We did
The
Rod
music
Sterling.
came over him, and he said, no, we got to move that up.
Yeah,
there.
move things around to get it really right. We fixed it. Those are things that are okay, to do. There's certain things, but like on ET and on Poltergeist, those mixes are locked. You don't want to screw with them.
Yeah. So a lot of people, asked when ET was coming out, was it remixed? It's really nothing to remix.
No.
You have 3 channels to work with, and it's a.
Well, it was 4. Because we
4,
had
but
surround.
I don't know, did you use
I
surround?
used the surround.
Yeah.
But it's a matter of replicating what was there and keeping the original intent and not trying to put today's sensibilities on top of it. The idea is most people listen to MP3s these days and streaming, and it sounds like crap. And our goal here was to make it as good as we could do and represent the original analog, if possible.
I have to ask you about that because a few things have happened. First of all, we have had this MP3, that everybody listens to, but we've also seen vinyl come back.
Yep.
And you are also a big proponent of the high resolution, and getting high resolution to the average listener.
Yeah.
And that's very, very challenging.
Yeah, well, one interesting thing that's happening now, there's a process called MQA, which is Master Quality Audio, that's come on the scene. And it's very interesting because you can take a 192.24 file, and they do what they call origami, where they're literally 5 pieces where they're folding D into C and C into B, and then it all goes into A into the noise floor. So it makes it a really small file. It's not data compression. I don't know how they do it. And then if you have the proper, and that means you can stream it like Tidal is doing. If you have a decoder, it opens it up to the full glory in your house. So I have been pushing to do that on a CD because we're losing the physical market. You can't put it on vinyl, but you can put it on a CD, which means that it wouldn't be 192.24, it would be 176.4 because everything has to be in levels of 44.1, which is
The Red Book CD, yeah.
16. So I have, and I did it with ET, where I encoded it, put it on a CD, and you could burn a CD and play in any CD player. If you've got the decoder and you plug it in the digital output, it opens up to
192.
the full enchilada.
78.
Very exciting, because for the people that buy soundtracks, the future is golden. Although I must say, a lot of soundtracks were only ever done at 44.1.
Yeah, and that would have been a
48K.
problem had we found the digital master on the ET.
Yeah, we would have been locked.
We're limited to that, right?
But
So-
in this case, we had the 35 millimeter mags.
Plus a 1/4 inch from England of the album master.
And we convinced the sound people at Universal to do the transfer at 192.24.
Right.
I'm sorry we didn't do it at 384, 32-bit, that's the next one, because we can put that onto the CD as well.
Wow.
And that's getting about as close to the original analog master as possible. So it's kind of exciting. The major record companies are on board. They're trying to figure out how this is going to get paid for, what they're going to charge people. I'm very involved in trying to convince the people that developed MQA to at least give us a minimum of a year to try it out. Do these discs, put them out there and see how the market is. Because if it works, we'll have physical media for a while now. They'll extend the life maybe 5 to 10 years, which is a big deal.
Yeah.
Because composers and artists are not making any money anymore, because there's no physical. It's all either all in concerts or concerts. Touring.
You've recently gotten also involved in the Disney Legacy Collection. You did a
Yeah.
number of scores for Disney.
Yeah.
You want to tell us what
I
some of
did,
those were? and
well,
what
I
you
did, started working with Alan Menken on Beauty and the Beast. I didn't record that. John Richards did the score, and, oh God, it just went blank.
Oh, for the songs?
Huh?
For the songs? You mean you did the songs?
Songs,
Howard
yeah.
Ashman.
Who?
Howard Ashman.
No, he
he
wrote
wrote
it.
it. He wrote it.
He wrote it. I'll figure this
Oh,
out.
you're saying-
Anyway,
Oh,
he's just, he has a scoring mixer, but he was living in New York, and they recorded the songs in New York. I mixed it, remixed the whole thing for the album. Then I wound up doing it in 32 languages for all the foreigners. Then I started doing a lot with Alan. And we did Beauty and the Beast musical, and I wound up producing that for the New York cast recording, and then in London, and Germany, and Japan, and then Australia, going around the world and doing it. So I've got Beauty and the Beast. One of the things we're doing now, I just did, Neil Bulk right here helped me, is Disney has a legacy collection. And so far I've done Little Mermaid, and now Beauty, and Pocahontas. We got Aladdin to do next. And go in and take the entire score, remix it. In most cases, I just went with my mixes or the original mixes of the songs. Don't go near them, because they are locked. You know, it's a period of time, history, but you all haven't heard the whole score beyond it in a new movie, so it's open season, you know, I could go with it. So Neil helped, and which Mike does, is go in and take all the cues and throw it up against the movie and make sure that it all sticks. We've got the right piece of music at the right place, the right edits,
Overlays.
inserts, and overlays, all that in there. So these legacy discs, Disney is really going to town to do it right. And it's really my hat off to them. I did one of these events with them. They have a thing called Friends of Rodin. And remember the thinker? That's the Rodin. And it's where they have lunch. People bring their food. It's a big room, conference room. They have a big sound system in there and whatnot. And they get people from different trades in making of music and movies and whatnot to come in and talk. And I did one on Beauty, what we were doing, talking about it. And they're just, the next one up I know is Aladdin. And I can't wait to get into that one, because that one, unlike, it's a funny thing, because Beauty was all done digitally on Mitsubishi 32 tracks. And they did it all at 48K, so there was really nothing in considered high resolution. 48K sits in there.
This is a Pro Digi.
No.
No, that's different.
No, the Mitsubishi?
Yeah.
I don't know what they called it.
Okay.
I mean, the first Mitsubishi 32 track happened, we used as a backup on Twilight Zone, the motion picture.
Right, and we found that. Right?
We found
You
that.
wanted to ultimately use the mag.
Yeah. And we did mags as well, because the focus was on the mag, the 32 track, and we did analog 24 track locked up, but I don't know where that went. That was the thing at Warner's. They were insistent, and I was cool about it. And I even ran a 2-track stereo digital recorder, like I did on these things. So we were running, mag, 4-track mags, 32 track, analog 24 track, and a stereo.
Any other backups, like a half-inch or?
Yeah, probably a half-inch. So we were running.
A lot of machines.
So the machine room was rocking. But the interesting thing is on these, and I think maybe the pictures went around, you can see the pictures of the machine room.
I think they probably already, somebody sold them on.
You can see the mag machines, and there's 2 machines there that are playing what Ken Hall had built. One was a dialogue track, and very rough, and another was a click track. In those days, we didn't have digital clicks like we do now, where it could be programmed, and Jerry used to do a lot of his own programming.
And you ever got the photos again if you want to see?
Yeah, there it is. So all the clicks were done optically. It would be optical punches, because that's what, like the streamers that used to go across the screen were scraped into the film and then punched. You know, where the
Physically done, right? Now
physically
it's
punched.
all, everything now is just at the keyboard.
It's on the keyboard. You don't have to worry about it. And this one probably, or that one, I don't know. They're rewinding here, but all the pops were built by hand and then transferred to mag. And God bless Kenny, I mean, if something changed, they couldn't do it. They had to work around it, do it in free time, and then cut it in.
Wow. But also, I mean, to just do another take of a cue, I mean, you're talking about an actual physical reel and a projection.
Well, yeah, projector was upstairs, projection room, same thing at Fox.
You gotta wait for it to be
Then
ready.
you have to wait for it to back up, and the projectionist controlled everything.
You had machine control.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
he fired these machines
Wow.
off. But everybody had to, okay, let's stop, let's take it back from the top. And everybody had to rewind everything. And it was kind of cool, actually, because the rhythm of the session was a lot more relaxed. You know, it's
You had a
not
few
digital,
breaths.
it's like,
It was kind of like bowling, which I don't like how they automate the scoring now. I
Oh.
used to like to take the break to sit down and write your score down.
yeah.
But now it's like you're ready to go because the machine doesn't.
Well, my mother used to copy the music a lot for a lot of the movies, John's stuff. I mean, she did copy ET, and for the orchestra. And you know, the copies were there on the session, sitting there,
Right.
there for me to another part. They didn't have to write it out.
Unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. Everything's changed, but it's cool though.
I think you were about to say why you're excited about Aladdin.
Oh, because it's all analog. It was all analog, 24 track.
After being.
Wow. It'll be interesting to, when if we get hold of, like, if it has raw takes or Robin Williams stuff.
Well, that's the thing I was talking with Disney yesterday about. There is a tape that we did when we were doing a couple of his songs where Robin did about 20 minutes. Just freedom, and it's fabulous. It's not X-rated, but it's just stream of consciousness, grooving.
Coming out.
And I thought I had a copy of it. I wish I did, but they're going to look for it at the studio.
Cool. We're gonna wrap up with a clip from ET before we do that.
Oh, we were here for ET.
Do we have any questions, Bruce? Yeah.
Yes.
Just to set this up, I spent the first part of this year 3.5 months in the hospital, and since I've gone out and done things afterwards, this is the best thing I've done.
Yeah.
And I want to thank both of you, and Mike knows this, and I say this to Mike constantly. The work you guys do, you bring a lot of joy to people who buy what you do. You brought joy to people. My childhood was changed by you and what you did. I'm also a huge Doors fan. I have no Doors questions. I'm not asking you to sign
He's dead.
anything. Yeah, I know, yeah.
I can
But,
assure you that.
but what you do, particularly what you're talking about with the future of physical media, is just great news. And the other thing I wanted to say is the passion that you put into stuff is really rippling out amongst these younger film score fans who are discovering these composers, because really today we don't have the same experience, and you both know why. But my real question is, just off the top of your head, if you don't know, you can just say no. Is there a composer today, a modern day composer, working that you really like? And if you have one, can you just say why?
You know, I like a lot of the stuff that James Newton Howard is doing. He's allowed now, because he's enough success, that he can start, I mean, that he can do James.
Right.
He is limited.
And you've done some for him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
And, but I also like, I just watched Logan. Remember the Motion Picture Academy, I get all these screeners by the pound. And I just watched Logan in my studio in surround. And I thought that Marco did a great job on that one.
Ultronic, yeah.
And I like what Aaron Zigman does. Aaron's really good.
Mhm.
There are a lot of, it depends on the movie. It depends on whether the composer is allowed to be.
Wow.
Next.
Wait, you didn't answer.
Oh.
Oh, me? Yeah, you. I said both of you.
Oh, okay. I have to agree about Marco, actually. You know, he surprises me. And I haven't seen that, so but I'm looking forward to it. And I'm a big James Newton Howard fan.
Real quick, I have to give a shout out to Neil Bulk
Yep.
and Dave, also, who do projects that I love and appreciate. And you guys were in my thoughts when I was in hospital too.
Well, you guys, you know, being able to dig down and find out what's under the rocks, we all forgot about. I mean, you do enough in your life that you don't remember it. And actually coming back to these movies later on, it's like re-experiencing them again, but in a different way. You know, they does bring emotionally some things. I mean, like the very end of this film,
That's what we'll
E.T., when, you know, E.T.'s going bye-bye, the dog's barking and E.T.'s talking, you know. I mean, I had lost my father right at that point. And when I did the first home video version for Universal Home Video, I mean, I broke down. You know, it really hammered.
6 years had gone by, and then you're now there faced with it again, probably not expecting it. That's
Yeah,
happened to me.
so it's amazing what, you know, and Ken Hall tells a story, unfortunately passed away last year.
Tell you what, why don't you roll this scene without the music, then you tell us.
Okay, well, I can do it while it's happening.
Okay, yeah.
At the end,
This
is
is-
this it, the sequence?
It's the ending, yeah.
Okay.
Just the Elliot goodbye.
So you'll understand.
It's amazing to see without music. And I also point out that the original plan was that there was a scene that followed this one. You may have seen it if you have the old Laserdisc bonus features of sort of a coda to the film in which they're back in Elliot's room. Any D&D fans here? D&D players? Okay, yeah, so playing Dungeons and Dragons, and now Elliot's the Dungeon Master. But this is, of course, written and filmed before you know what the score is going to be.
All right.
When you hear the score that ended up being at the end of this film, recorded wild on top of it, and the picture cut to it, you can't possibly go anywhere after that.
Yeah.
It ends like an opera. It's like the end of the Ring song.
And I think in the dub, it really slammed it home for
Right.
Stephen. He knew what he said, stop, we're done.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Lights.
Yeah, lights, please.
Explorers, I know there was a lot of reverb on that one. Were you involved in Explorers? There was, all I can say, it just depends on the score and the film.
Did Jerry seem to get more interested in reverb, the washier sound?
No, we were more into air. You know, that it sounded open and that you could hear all the voices and all the interplay.
Because the Insurrection is like doesn't sound at all like Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Yeah, I know, it was different. Like, my favorite, First Contact is one of my absolute favorites of his. You know, scores. You had your hand up earlier.
Yeah.
I was just curious, who decides and how do they decide what tracks from the score to live on the album?
Good.
Oh, that, generally it's the composer.
And what would Jerry say if he were here to
He would
with us
say,
all these expansions?
he'd say, well, you know, I don't agree with it, but. No, true, because he only wanted what he thought was best as a composition. I mean, I remember we were doing Total Recall, and you know the whole sequence where Arnold goes through the big X-ray where they have it, and then he breaks through and it's a big fight, and then he winds up on the subway. We cut that, we recorded that cue, and Jerry listened to the playback and he said, I've written a movement. For, you know, I couldn't get him to write a symphony. Yes.
I don't know, supervising sound editor, and I can concur with you about the Robin Williams thing, because I actually got access to those tracks, and I used them on a film, My Favorite Martian. We were doing a temp, we were trying to put a voice.
You have that tape?
Not anymore. I might be able to find a backup for it, because it was a number of years before. Now I save everything, back then we didn't.
Yeah, I
have
did
that.
too. But that was one that
I might be able to get, because I do work with Disney Animation. and I
yeah,
might be
well,
able to-
I've got Tommy Millstone, who's the guy over there. He digs down, he finds things. So
Yeah,
we'll
I might be able to find it for you.
Okay.
The other question I have a 16-year-old boy who wants to get into composition for film and media and stuff. And what would be the best, for the education right now? He plays like guitar, bass, and drums, and he's like.
God, that's so hard. All I can tell you is he ought to listen to as much music as possible. I mean, Jerry Goldsmith's biggest influence was Brahms. And then, he got into some 12-tone and Stravinsky. But
Didn't he want Stravinsky's arrangement of the national anthem?
we did use it. It's on,
No, that's not what it is, no.
that Stravinsky's version is what's on the front of this.
No, it's not.
It isn't.
Sorry.
And I-
Yeah, so they ended up with the sort of the Air Force arrangement.
Oh, okay. But I know we recorded Stravinsky's version. I
Really?
could have sworn
He
we-
really wanted that?
Yeah, Jerry wanted that one.
Check that out, it's on YouTube, it's really a trip to Stravinsky.
Yes, Marshall.
Yeah, you mentioned that last cue of ET was recorded while they turned off the picture.
Oh, no, no, no.
Oh, no, that was on the picture?
That was with
It
pictures.
was really cut that slowly?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
without the music, it's, you'd never hold on.
No, I think he's asking, yeah, that cue was actually done, that was one of the ones that said, I'll turn off the picture.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
okay.
recut to the music.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then
In fact,
recut
He did recut it to it.
on our new release, there's an alternate version of it, and you can hear the tempos are kind of like they speed up, they slow down. Because he's
Generally,
trying,
he slowed down and made it
yeah, because he's
bigger and
trying
more
to keep,
majestic,
he's
so
trying
he
to-
added frames.
Right, in the early takes, he's
Yeah.
trying to keep up with what how the picture's cut, which requires the tempo to change, and it's kind of uncomfortable. You sort of feel like you're just not, so turning the picture off, he can just naturally feel how the music wants to be.
Well, I mean, you know, as a film editor, Marshall's a great film editor, and done a bunch of films with Joe Dante. And you know as well as I did, they get in there and all, as I said, oh my God, that's what's going on. I like what the music is saying better, I'll go back, and I'm sure you had to go back and recut. on
I
a
don't
couple
remember
occasions.
ever doing that, actually.
Really?
No, maybe.
Maybe.
We did it once.
I mean, not a lot, it doesn't happen that often,
Not that often.
but it does happen.
But that's why without the music, it seems so slow, because they
Yeah.
obviously went back and
Yeah.
added to shots.
Well, it's
So you
also
still
like
get
in
it
Poltergeist, in
together.
that opening sequence, it feels so slow
Yeah.
until the music got in.
Yeah, sure does, yeah. I mean, it just changes your perception of everything, you know, and also it creates a memory. You know, that's why when you listen to this music, I'm sure you suddenly
Well,
feel like you could
When I was a little kid and I went to see, you're not gonna believe this, but they used to perform The Sorcerer's Apprentice from Fantasia with a live orchestra, a lot. And I, a little kid, I remember my mother taking me. And then when I saw Fantasia, The Rite of Spring blew me away. And I remembered dinosaurs, you know, so. It's, you know, you remember a certain piece of music and it's evocative and brings scenes to your head.
It's
It
unbelievable.
did.
Yeah, I don't think I remembered this since we visited Jerry before Star Trek the Motion Picture, while we were doing it. I wonder if you remember this too. This goes back to the question about what music was selected. We spoke to him about isolated music for the release of Director's Edition. And I just remembered that he also, at that point, he talked about releases of music. And he said, whatever happened to leaving wanting for more? About people leaving wanting more. And he was understanding that people were getting complete scores, but I remember that was, do you remember him saying that too?
Yeah, I know, I
I
remember him
never
talking
thought
about it,
it
he was
was
referring
right.
to certain scores he did as bottle caps. He said it was for the bottle cap collectors. He's like, we don't really need Mr. Baseball, you know, but everybody wanted
Yeah,
him
well,
anyway. So,
There were a lot of scores that he didn't want to come out.
so, I mean, or he would complain that they didn't play well enough, and that's
Yeah.
why, you know.
We had a couple of movies where the orchestra just was not in sync, and he did not want soundtrack stuff.
Yeah, plus there was, of course, limitations at the time. If you're doing a single LP, you had maybe at most 50 minutes to work with, right?
At
So-
the most.
So if you had a 100-minute score, you can't do it, so you
Yeah,
have to.
I mean, Star Trek, the motion picture, we only came out with one disc.
37 minutes, right? So, and then some interesting decisions are made, 'cause like the original album for Poltergeist, the first thing is the end credits.
That's right.
The next track is from the climax of the movie, so it's like, it has nothing, but those of us who like respond narratively to the score,
Yeah,
want to hear
well,
it.
Jerry was
that
more
way.
into compositionally, how he felt like
Right,
it
right.
played as a piece.
Right.
That's where he was coming from.
It's an interesting, but they're both valid. I mean,
Yeah.
the listening experience or hearing the score, and it's, they're both very valid, so. Anything else? So, okay,
Wow.
wow, this was really a great time. Hope you all had a good time. It's great to celebrate these 35th anniversaries one more time with all you guys, and to be with Bruce, who I love working with, and I hope we do a lot more projects together. So thanks all for coming.
Even stuff that I didn't do.
Let's go
I love
for it.
that.
Yeah,
You
let's
kidding?
go for it. Yeah, let's do it.
No. And I mean, it's like, I don't have any, said, people say, when are you gonna retire? I said, why?
Amen.
What
No, you
for?
can't. John Williams just asked that. He doesn't know it's like retired from breathing.
Yeah, that's about it.
You can't-
You know, it's, Victor Borger comes on stage, one thing, and he stands there and he goes, a bunch of smoke comes out. The guy's holding the cigarette, and he says, I'm real tired today. I've been breathing. With that, I'll say good night.
Yeah.